Hi there, welcome to the latest episode of my 10-minute moan. And the topic of this 10-minute moan is a remarkable situation where the Scottish media now describe anyone who is an activist for either the Conservative or Reform Party as far right. Now what's happened is, it's just bonkers. To me, this just does not make sense. That we've got a third hit piece article about the same young man, a 21-year-old activist, who's been described in a manner which beggars belief. And what he's doing now is he's actually involved in a fundraiser to try and help other people who are less fortunate than most who become lawyers to enable them to get a start in their career. And he's organised a fundraiser. And now it seems that some people are intent in destroying that fundraiser by calling this guy a far-right activist. And I'll go through the story and I'll go through each point of it and explain what I know about a guy that I've never met, and I don't think the journalist that wrote the story's ever met. But what I've done is I've spoken to him now 3 times on the telephone and a couple of text messages, but I've been able to find out the truth with very, very little time and little effort, to be perfectly honest with you. And what's been written about this guy today is not true. And I'd like to point out that this is a guy that I've got a lot of respect for, because there's not too many young men at his age, 21, who are so politically aware and politically involved. And one thing I'd like to pick out is I've recently been made the chair of the SDP in Scotland, and this guy has represented the Tory and the Reform parties, 2 parties who I'm not a member of. So this isn't a defence of a politician or someone in politics that I'm actually gaining anything from. This is me sitting, looking at this story and being able to digest the difference between right and wrong. And I wish him good luck going forward, but it looks as if somebody somewhere has decided that you've not to have a future in politics, and potentially you've not even have a future in law. And that's really disturbing. And I'll explain why as I go through the story. So the headline is far-right activist exposed as organiser behind a charity Scottish bash. Right? A far-right activist. This young guy did go out and campaign for Tory candidates during the general election in July, and has been out recently campaigning for Reform candidates in the Glasgow by-elections for the City Council. By-elections needed because some people went and won seats in Westminster, and obviously their seats in the council will become available. So that's a headline, which I genuinely don't know how you can go about calling somebody a far-right activist when their full sum of their activism has been the Tory and the Reform Party, neither of whom I am a member or will be voting for at the next elections. But I can't see how anybody who does any activism for them can be described as such, and I find that quite worrying. However, the subline is: law student John White travelled to France to meet Marine Le Pen's national rally and is a member of Nigel Farage's Reform Party. Now, 3 bits of information in that one line are correct. Sorry, 3 bits of that. 3 things said in that line. 2 of them are correct. He did travel to France. He is a member of Nigel Reform's party, but he didn't travel to France to meet Marie Le Pen's national rally, as suggested in that byline. He was just celebrating his 21st birthday with his girlfriend, and he met somebody who he'd met previously at a political convention, and there was a photograph taken beside a banner for the election that was taking place. But there's a previous story written a few months ago that claimed that John White was out being a political campaigning for Le Pen's national rally. And that's just not true. He was in Britain while the campaigning was going on for that election. He'd been in France twice, met folk from that party twice, once at a political convention for young people, and once while celebrating his 21st birthday. But this story tells you he went to France to meet them. No, he went to France to celebrate his birthday. That's the fact. That's a big difference. So a charity promoting diversity in the legal profession has launched an investigation after it emerged a far-right activist was organising a high-profile fundraiser. Now, I don't think that's true. I generally don't believe that there's any investigation. I think that's just a big scary word. Again, I've used it for emerged that this far-right activist was organising a high-profile fundraiser. The truth is, John, from the East End of Glasgow, has been very fortunate, worked hard, went to school, didn't gain enough qualifications at school to get himself into a law degree university course. So he went to college, got the appropriate qualifications, and then, and only then, started his career and is currently studying for law. And these are all things that have been divulged by this piece. And because he's from the East End of Glasgow, a place not known to produce a lot of students for law degrees, he got involved in a fundraiser to try and put money into a pot to help people from areas like his and areas like I was born up in Linwood to try and give these kind of kids a foot up into law. That's what he was doing. They're trying to stop and sabotage that. Edinburgh University student John White has set up the Law Scott Foundation event, which will see leading KC Donald Finlay deliver a presentation on Madeline Smith, a 19th century Glasgow socialite accused of poisoning her lover. Now that's amazing, because we're into the third paragraph and it's the only one they've got spot on. Where are we now? The Law Scott Foundation was set up by the Law Society of Scotland, and the event is sponsored by the Faculty of Advocates and a top law firm, Morton Fraser McRoberts. But it's emerged White is a member of Nigel Farage's Reform Party and was heavily criticised in the summer when, repeating it again, he travelled to France, a wee bit different this time, and met with Marine Le Pen's far-right national rally in France. He met a candidate of theirs who had met in a previous trip to France. But at least this time they're not suggesting that he went to France just to meet them. They're being actually a wee bit more truthful this time. Where are we? This newspaper understands neither Finlay or the other organisations involved were aware of White's background, and an investigation has now been launched. Well, one, I don't believe one has, and two, how do they know about his background when this is the third time you've claimed in your newspaper that he's a far-right activist? Your newspaper stories can't get read much then, because this is the third time you've stated that this guy's a far-right activist. And obviously there sounds that they know now, because your journalist would have phoned them when creating this story. Law Scott Foundation Chair Christine McClintock said, "We will look into the matters raised. Our priorities are to act in the best interest of the students we support to ensure our charity's mission of diversity and inclusion continues." Now that's a cute words, right? And I don't really think Christine McClintock of the Law Scott Foundation's having a pop here, right? But when you consider her words, if, let's just say for us, he is right of centre in his politics, is there, John? I don't think anybody's going to debate that when you consider both parties that he's been campaigning for before. But even if he was far right, which I don't think he is, he's certainly right of centre. Well, your charity's mission is diversity and inclusion. You must include by default people who are right of centre, because that's what inclusion means. Inclusion doesn't mean everybody we like and ignore the people we don't like, because that's the complete opposite of inclusion. But when you live in the United Kingdom and people go on about inclusion, they kind of forget about white people, right people, and, middle-aged guys, for example, often get ignored when we talk about inclusion. So if your charity's words are about inclusion, then you must accept people from the right of centre, or you're not inclusive at all. The Law Scott Foundation exists to support less advantaged aspiring young lawyers in Scotland, whatever their backgrounds. We are entirely reliant on donations of money and in-kind assistance to continue our important work. So, the type of people that they're trying to help are actually people like John White. So why would anybody think someone like John White was not eligible to help this organisation? Now, the only type of people who want to do that are people who oppose right of centre. And that's the problem we have in society today, where if you're anything right of centre, that's termed bad. And I don't know who gets to make these decisions, but this article again is one that highlights those decisions are already made. We provide support for an inspiring and diverse group of young people who are studying law. Our goals and values are completely at odds with political extremism. And again, I don't think this Christy McClintock's necessarily having a pop at John here, because John certainly doesn't click any of the criteria she's talking about. He is not an extremist. Unless, of course, the Tories and the Reform now are extremists. And although I'm not particularly fond of either of them at this precise moment in time, I can't see anybody who's out campaigning for them makes them a political extremist. Now, if I had been campaigning for the Le Pen's party, who are far right, which was a claim made about John White previously, which is totally unfounded, then I can understand it potentially being considered politically extreme. He's not. He's been representing the Tories in Reform. So I'm not far on this to go. National Rally, which used to be the National Front, wants to end birthright citizenship for people born in France to foreign parents, making it easier to close mosques and bar dual nationals from some state jobs. And I don't know if that's true or not, but let's say it is. And what? John's not been out champing doors for them. John's been out champing doors for Tories and Reform. White was pictured with National Rally President John Bardella on his trip to Paris. This is a trip to Paris he went to with his girlfriend to celebrate his 21st birthday. And he'd met this guy previously and had dealings with him online. If that makes you far right. The former Scottish Tory Council candidate, that's John, previously, who has now joined Nigel Farage's Reform, tweeted, "It was great to see a surge of people wanting to put their own nations first and arise for the right in Europe. Maybe countries out with can learn some lessons." Now, is that what the problem is here? Because this young man's saying, basically, it's good to see folk putting their own nationals first, right? Is that it? Is that you the devil for saying that? Because I tell you what, I'm saying the exact same. Pick me rather than him, okay? And I'll explain why you should pick me rather than him in a few minutes, because by picking on him, you're actually trying to damage his future, intentionally or otherwise. But let me come back to that once I finish the story. The Law Scott Foundation event is due to take place on Friday, December the 6th. Well, I'm quite sure it will take place, despite folk trying to put the blockers on it, right? A source said nobody was aware of White's political leanings. A source. I'd love to know who this source is. That's the person that came to you with the story and said, that's a bad boy, this, right? Nobody was aware of White's political leanings, and it is fair to say the Law Scott Foundation was dismayed to find out about them. Now, I don't believe this person. I generally don't, because his political leanings are what? Tory and Reform. And that makes people dismayed, because the rest of it's lies. It is not true. He's not been campaigning for National Front in France, ever. So far as anyone knew, he was a bright, aspiring young lawyer who wanted to help others from less off backgrounds break into the law profession. Well, that's true, he is. A post of the Faculty of Advocates website states John White, an LLB law student at the University of Edinburgh, is organising an event, an evening with Donald Finlay, KC, in Parliament House. So that's the story finished. Now let me tell you what this could happen. This is a young lad that's trying to become a lawyer. That's what he's been trying to do since he was 16 years of age, going to college, then on to his university. And before he even becomes a lawyer, he's actually trying to help the next crowd up, who are similar to him, maybe less fortunate than John. John's, from no for the Newton Mearns or the Bishop Briggs areas of Glasgow. But, he's from good stock. He's a good kid. He's been brought up well. He wasn't dragged up and stuff like that. But what he's trying to do is help people with the same aims as him get to the same goals as him. and he's been slaughtered for it by some people out there thinking they'll tag him as a far-right extremist, activist. Now, I know what happens when stories are getting built with newspapers. They have to phone people to try and get them, so they'll have phoned the sponsors, they'll have phoned the venue, they'll have phoned the advocacy, they'll have phoned everybody they could to try and get the story bigger. Because that's what journalists do, or at least that's what they should do. And I'm quite sure they did in this instance, right? And by doing that, you're actually potentially putting at risk the sponsors, etc., the venue, and the participants in this event. Now, hopefully, they all just say, and what, when they get the phone call. But that's what the consequences you can have for this. Now, what they've also been doing is they've been putting him in to law firms and stuff when they're making these phone calls and saying this guy's far right. It's a young man in, 2 or 3 years will hopefully have finished his course and be looking for gainful employment as a lawyer. But we've got people in our society who are trying to badmouth him in the exact field that he's trying to make a career for himself. And I don't know if that's an accident or not, but they're actually jeopardising this kid's dreams and aspirations. Because they'll have phoned all the sponsors, they'll have been phoning the advocates, all these people in the legal industry and telling them that they're going to put this story in about this far-right activist, which is completely inaccurate. And it could scupper his chances of getting gainful employment as he leaves university. And it's sickening. So I take my hat off to John White, and I applaud that young man, not only for his activism with two parties that I've got nothing to do with, right? I'd love him to be an activist for SDP, but looks like he'll be finished with politics after this nonsense, and he seems quite happy at the forum. So I'm not going to gain out of this, all right? But this is a guy who stood up a couple of weeks ago, on the 7th of October, on the streets of Kelvin Grove in Glasgow, to deliver his respects to the people who died on the 7th of October. And it's shouted down by people in my hometown of Glasgow. By singing River to the Sea and their genocide and their baby killers and all this. And it's fun. I'm trying to I'll struggle to explain that those two things aren't connected. What he'd done then in the 7th of October and what's happening today in the media in Glasgow. And people like John White and people like Audrey Dempsey, who I covered in a previous video and hopefully I'll cover again in the future, who was actually a Labour city councillor, who stood up for white kids and teachers who were racially abused in Glasgow schools. Both suddenly are under the spotlight and untruths written about both of them in Scotland. This is not the Scotland that I want. This is not the Scotland where anybody who doesn't tick the boxes is flunked the wolves. And I'm quite sure I'll be next. Maybe not next, but I'll be in the future because I've already said that I'll be standing in Holyrood for elections in 2026. And I know one party already that won't want me there. And as we get closer to the dates of the election, whatever party thinks they want to be there and most likely to be there in control, then I'll be a target for them as well. So I'm happy. I understand at 51 years of age, I'm taking on a job that will attract that. Well, pick me. Stop picking women like Audrey Dempsey, who's a good woman, and her community should be proud to have her, and stop doing it to a 21-year-old man who's looking to carve himself a career in the legal profession. If you enjoyed the video, give me a thumbs up. If you've not already done so, please hit the subscribe and notification bell. If you have anything to say about the matter, please hit the comments below. I always enjoy reading them. But most importantly of all, unless you are the type of person who wants to try and bury people like Audrey Dempsey and John White, no you, but
everyone else, have a great day. Cheerio, bye now.